Hello, welcome back to FranklinCovey's On Leadership series. My name is Scott Miller and I serve as your weekly host. I am both honored and a bit horrified today that I have the renowned leadership expert and authority Liz Wiseman here live in the studio. Liz, I say welcome, and I'm horrified only because I feel like you're my psychiatrist.
We're going to have fun.
Without the benefit of the hourly rate.
I know, yeah, I should send you a bill, seriously.
Well, welcome to the studio today. Your book, Multipliers, has a place of honor behind me because I can tell you, I've been in this business for 25 years. And you can see I've been a fairly prolific reader of content around leadership development and
So this is your personal library?
This is my personal library.
Wow.
These I was allowed to carefully curate the books that had the biggest impact on my career. Almost all of them are nonfiction. Most of them are about leadership. But I can tell you, having worked in this firm for 22 years, your book Multipliers has had equally, if not a bigger influence on me than Dr. Covey's book, The 7 Habits. It is a masterpiece, what you've written here.
Thank you.
Truly. I mean that sincerely.
Well, and we have a foreword from Dr. Covey.
Right, which is a treasured foreword, right?
Well, it is a treasured foreword, and for me, when he agreed to write this foreword, I felt really honored that he would be willing to put his name on this piece of work.
And if you knew how many tens of thousands of manuscripts that have come to his office during his life, you'd be even more honored, right? How few he actually chose to endorse. So
it's an absolute treasure to me.
And his foreword's great. I enjoy reading his foreword.
It's really good. In fact, I see tweets where people start reading the book like, hey, I'm going to be reading Multipliers, and I can tell when they're reading the foreword because they often tweet like, I hope the rest of the book is as good as the foreword.
Liz, I can't talk enough about the impact your book's had on me. I've read it twice, which is rare. I don't read most books twice.
Yeah, you move in forward.
I do move forward. I do. I've only watched one movie in my life twice, actually.
Wow.
And that was one of Jim Carrey's movies, so I will keep the title quiet, which one it was. But when I first read Multipliers, I was honestly a little depressed because it kind of called me out, I felt like. I almost felt like it was my biography, with you keeping my name private, and perhaps it is. I won't flatter myself.
Well, and I called it Multipliers rather than diminishers.
That's right,
you could say it's my biography.
I appreciate that. When I first read it, it kind of took my breath away. Took the wind out of my sail because I found myself more identifying with the diminisher side than the multiplier side. And then I reread it about 6 months later with maybe a little more, less ego. The book's not about me. The book's about the world. And as I started to realize, it isn't you're one or you're the other. You're not just a multiplier or you're just a diminisher. That there's hope for people like me. That it's a path, it's a continuum. There are multiplier moments, so to speak. I'm excited to hear all about your research and your history around why you wrote the book, how its impact has been. But first of all, I'd like to talk about your journey. I open every one of these sessions talking about kind of how you got here today. I know it was Lyft, because you told me it was the Lyft. But kind of where have you been? Maybe spend a few minutes talking about your history at Oracle, your experience there. You talk a lot about that in the book, but share us in a few minutes kind of how you got here to the studio.
Well, I spent my whole career in corporate education. And I started at Oracle, and I had a very brief career as a trainer. I taught people how to use Oracle software. It was sort of the coup of my career, really, is to have been this technical trainer with actually very little technical background. So that was a story in and of itself. But then I got thrown into management. I consider it as a child. I was like 24, 25 years old. They're like, you're now in charge of training for the company, and Larry Ellison wants a university, so go build this university. So I'm very young for a really big job, and I think it's where I became really interested in leadership because I had no idea what I was doing. I was woefully underqualified for a fairly big leadership job, and I spent a lot of time watching executives. And I was at Oracle 17 years, running the university, running the talent development function for the company. I leave and I start doing executive coaching, and I spent a couple years doing that, and that's where really the need for the Multipliers book arose. And then I decided I would go into research. And one of the things about my career, I always felt very comfortable moving into different parts of leadership development and education because that was my experience at Oracle. It's like you kind of got the job before you fully had the skills. Sure, right. And so when I had this idea and I needed to write this, I thought, this can't be that hard. I've spent my career working with people who are professors and researchers, and I don't know, that seems pretty doable. So I started doing that. So I've really been at the leadership development for, I guess it's about 25 years. Now here's the great irony. So a couple years ago, ATD, the organization ATD, gave me this award, the Champion of Talent Award. And so it's kind of a big honor. And it's this award they give to people outside of the industry who have been like champions of talent, like Chris Anderson, who started TED, and Salman Khan, who started the Khan Academy, and then me. And they're giving me this award, and I'm like, wow, I'm really flattered, but I'm raising my hand saying, by the way, I've spent my whole career in this industry. Like, you are my people, but yet it was for people outside of the industry. So I guess I've been very helpful to the industry, but I'm a has-been. That's kind of how I took it. Yeah. I'm like, clearly I'm not in the corporate education space anymore, but I once was. I once had a life. On the corporate side, which is really affected how I think as a researcher, an author, and an educator.
Well, you've kind of undersold your experience at Oracle. I mean, Oracle's a Fortune 50 company, I'm guessing, and you were...
It was a huge job.
Right.
I had a huge job there.
Massive responsibility. I'm assuming working with a lot of very seasoned leadership people with big egos and big responsibilities, and a lot of that experience really instructed your learning that's applied in the book. Is this true?
Oh yeah, I got thrown in. Like, I got thrown into the deep end, and I got thrown to the wolves. I mean, these were really, really tough people. I once had someone say, who had been working for me for a while, he's like, wow, Liz, you are not as advertised. He goes, you come off as this like super easygoing,
kind of like me,
nice person. Yeah. And he goes, but you're like
the real deal.
Tough. And I'm like, well, what were you thinking? Did you not read my background? Like, I was an executive at Oracle. Like, they don't
mess around.
They don't mess around. And I mean, I had an amazing experience there, but it was a collection of type A driven, hyper achievement oriented, really smart, brilliant, capable people who had drive. And I loved working there, and it was this wonderful meritocracy, and I loved working for Larry Ellison. I mean, he was tough, but he was fair, and I just felt like I had the most amazing job in the whole world. I was actually really sad to leave, but I love what I do.
But this isn't too shabby either. This is a good job as well, that you have now.
Oh, I love getting to research and write and teach.
The premise of multipliers, one of the premises, is that multipliers are genius makers. Talk a bit about why you wrote the book and some of the key thoughts you want people who maybe haven't read it yet or are going to buy it this afternoon or buying it right now online. What are some of the key points in multipliers?
Well, in some ways the book was my post-Oracle therapy. And it really started with this observation I had day one at Oracle. So, Oracle hired for this trifecta of talent, really smart, achievement-oriented, and nice. And there's a lot of really nice people, but one of the things I noticed is in their hiring, sometimes they compromised on nice. Rarely on the first two. And so as I entered into this, I was just so blown away by all these brilliant people I was working with. And I became, in some ways, a genius watcher, just fascinated by the intelligence of all these people I was working with. But then, not too long into the experience, I start to notice some things. I'm like, wow, not everyone who's brilliant causes brilliance. Like, there are some people who are really, really smart themselves, but nobody around them is smart. And I would watch these leaders, and again, because I got thrown into senior management pretty early on, and I'm the youngest one there, I'm watching what other people are doing. I'm like, why is it that's one executive, like, he's brilliant, but when he walks in a room, everyone like holds back. Shuts down, plays it safe. And some people noticeably cower, but other people just hold back because, I don't know, there's a really smart person talking, and so they just defer. But then I watched another type of leader, equally brilliant and capable, but somehow this leader caused brilliance. Like, instead of using their intelligence as a weapon that shut people down, they used their intelligence as a tool. And I saw people be big around them, and other people would be articulate and thoughtful and at their very best around leader B, but leader A they're at a fraction of their capability. And I just thought it was fascinating. And it wasn't until I left Oracle and I started doing some coaching work, and I'm coaching other executives in tech, often with the same kind of really smart, but not necessarily aware of the impact they're having on others, that I actually went out looking for an article in HBR. I thought, someone certainly has researched this. Let me find a good article so I can help this one executive understand that his intelligence isn't contagious. And I went looking for something around like the multiplication of intelligence, and there was nothing out there. And that's why I said, to me, it was such an important observation that I'm like, surely someone has researched this, and they hadn't. And so I thought, well, that can't be that hard.
Is the difference in the two people, I imagine, because your book is research-based, what makes it so credible, is the difference in the person that was the genius versus the genius maker, was it an intentional, when you looked at them as a whole, was it an intentional strategy? Was it unintentional? Was it their character? Had they had a good leader that modeled that? What was the difference? Did you see any defining differences?
Yeah, I have to admit, so I'm going to give you some confessions of a social science researcher, is that
not appropriate in a therapy session. I'm the patient, remember?
Oh, I don't get anything out of this. Okay. So when I first started looking at this, it was so binary to me. And I think the first edition of the book is more focused on, there are multipliers and there are diminishers. And I mentioned in the first edition this idea of the accidental diminisher.
Right.
I don't think I understood it as deeply as I needed to understand that. And I thought that there were these multipliers and these diminisher leaders, and almost like I could walk through the hallways of a corporation and I could, almost like a duck, goose kind of exercise, and I could sort people. And I think what I've learned is that this accidental diminisher, this is the norm, not the exception, that most of the diminishing that's happening in our workplaces, in our nonprofits, even in our churches, in our homes, most of the diminishing that's happening around us is coming from the really, like, the good guy who's trying to be a good leader. It's coming from the accidental diminisher. And so I've spent a lot more of my time trying to understand, how is it that we end up shutting people down almost to a debilitating level while holding the best of intentions, like while really liking the person, while wanting to be a good leader, doing the very things you think are empowering, to find out that actually they're enervating.
Your book has had a profound impact on our executive team at FranklinCovey, because I think we see in our chairman some versions of multiplication, some versions of diminishing. We read it and all began to identify with what it's like to be an accidental diminisher. Since I've read the book, I've thought about you and it literally hundreds of times. Here's a perfect example. Just yesterday, even though I knew you were coming today to be interviewed, just yesterday, I was in a meeting with 3 very competent colleagues of mine. They report up through me, and independent of me, they have as much institutional knowledge or more about our content as I do. They are as smart or smarter in most areas than I am, because they have expertise in their stewardships and I don't. And we were sitting in a meeting yesterday, and I was literally dictating words to them about...
Knowing I was coming?
I know.
Scott!
I know. But this is just you and me. No one's watching, so it's just you and me.
You're just giving fodder for our conversation.
But I don't know that I'm that unique. I mean, I literally was dictating how to write things, and as I was doing, I was sort of having this existential crisis, which was, I am doing the exact opposite of everything Liz says to do in her book. I am dictating to them my genius on this when they could write just as smart, if not smarter, words. And I was wrestling with, well, so is this my value to the firm? Am I growing them? How long can I do this? I mean, how am I ever going to add more value if I'm dictating sentences to, 6-figure people paid, leaders in this company? And I was wrestling with, well, is this sort of my quality standard? I'm inspiring them, or am I holding them back? And I was wrestling with, which I bet a lot of leaders do, which is my value in some ways is getting it right. Or having it on brand with, is their version good enough because they're going to take it to a different level with their skill set over time.
Right.
I gotta think it's a common struggle that leaders wrestle with.
Well, it is, and the wrestle that you just went through there is a wrestle I go through. You know, you're saying, oh man, I'm doing the very things that Liz tells me not to do. Well, I've had that exact same experience. Like, I'm doing the very things Liz Wiseman tells me not to do. And the wrestle there is really what we want people to do, which is, am I in a situation where I should be adding value based on my knowledge and my experience, or is this one where I should be stepping back and letting my team do this? And you know, one of the misunderstandings of multipliers is that it is a hands-off, soft way of leading. Like, my job as a multiplier is to see and use and grow the intelligence of others. So I'm going to be like this neutral, non-evaluating kind of servant of the group, and I'm just going to be all about others. Well, actually, that's a total misunderstanding. It's about using all of the intelligence that's available to you on your team, including your own. And so it's not about helping other people be big by being small. You know, the best leaders know when it's time to be big and when it's time to be small. And they vacillate between the two. We often, I think, overvalue consistency as a leader, whereas I think the best leaders sometimes go big, like, hey, I've got a set of ideas, I'm going to bring them to the table. But they don't do that all the time. They also know when it's time to retreat and say, you know what, let me frame the task, make a suggestion, and then turn this over to somebody else. Versus times when you need to come in big with your own ideas. So being a multiplier is not about being small. It's about playing your own strengths in a way that everyone else plays at their very best. You know, it's knowing how to temper some of your strengths to make room for other people's.
Right. And that's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because I'm going to guess the majority of leaders became a leader their first time because they were killing it. Right? They were either exceeding their sales goal, their project went the best, the supply chain was the smoothest, but they were promoted because they were perhaps recognized as the highest contributing individual contributor. They got promoted over their peers, and now they're wrestling with what got me here isn't going to take everyone there, and you all have some self-preservation, right? Because you want to be seen as being credible.
You want to be value add.
That's
you don't
right.
want to be like the empty suit.
And not every organization values
management.
That's right.
Like, so what do you do if you're not like writing code or selling software?
It's really your team that's doing it. What do you do? So what advice would you give to people like me again that are, you know, have been trying to make their mark, but they also realize that, you know, 2018 leadership is about being a genius maker, not the genius yourself. There's a constant struggle there. Well,
I often look at it this way: it's like at the top of the intelligence hierarchy is not the.
No, sorry. That's not where you were going.
We're going to go way back here to the very beginning on this. We're going to start with chapter 1. No, is that at the top of the intelligence hierarchy isn't the genius; it's the genius maker. That it is a form of genius in and of itself. It's playing big. You know, one of my favorite examples of this was experience Magic Johnson had. He's a very young man. So, you know, Magic Johnson, the former Lakers player, the Olympic basketball NBA star, entrepreneur, incredible business leader, president of basketball operations for the Lakers. He had this experience when he was a young man, and it really shaped the way he led. And so you have to imagine, could you imagine being the coach to Magic Johnson when he's a high school kid? So he's a total phenom. Of course, he doesn't go by Magic then. He goes by Irvin. And he's a young kid growing up in Michigan, and his coach says to him, Irvin, every time you get the ball, I want you to, you'd think it might be pass, but what his coach said to him is, every time you get the ball, I want you to take the shot. And so this really talented kid took all the shots every time he got the ball, and you can imagine his team's throwing him the ball because they've got this like phenom on their team, and the coach loves it because he's super coachable, and the players all love it because they're winning every game. And like, is there a high school kid who doesn't want to win? And so it's going great until after one game. So they're winning game after game after game, and there's one game comes to an end, and all the kids are leaving the gym with their parents, and young Irvin notices the faces of the parents who came to watch their young sons play, of course. And what did they get? They got sort of like an early version of, Laker Showtime magic. And he saw this, and it really affected him. And he said, I made a decision, as a young man, that I would use my God-given talent to help everyone on the team be a better player. And it was this orientation that earns him this nickname of Magic. This Michigan sports writer said, this guy is magic. He raises the level of play of every team that he plays on. And I think this captures the mindset, the essence of how these multiplier leaders think. Like, I'm going to use my God-given talent to help everyone on the team be a better player. Like, I'm going to use my talent. Like, I bring something to it, but I'm going to use it to raise the level of play for others. And why I think Magic sort of captures this is it's not like he did this from the sidelines. It's not like he never took a shot. I've actually studied his career. It's amazing.
He calibrated this balance quite intentionally.
Yeah, and he played huge, but he played in a way that invites everyone else to play huge. And I think that's the position you want to be as a leader.
Say this again, because I think that's prophetic.
Play all of your own capability, but play it in a way that invites everyone to play all of theirs as well. And maybe no one on the team was ever as good as Magic, but it's almost like you're inviting in the capability of others. It's almost like you're daring it in, but if you only play your own capability, and so many of these leaders, so many of us well-intended leaders end up diminishers because we're so busy playing the game ourselves. We're so busy. People are throwing balls at us. Lots coming out of us. People are asking us questions. And it's not that we don't value the people around us. It's we just are preoccupied. It's what happens when you're talented is people expect you to do things. And part of what I'm asking people to do is sort of just eyes up. Instead of just focused on here's my work, here's what people need of me, here's what I think my contribution is, like eyes up, look at the people around you. Are they fully utilized? If not, your job is to get 100% of their capability. You're paying for 100%, you might as well get 100%.
The challenge that you just gave us requires a lot from leaders. It requires self-awareness, self-reflection, a level of maturity that makes you look beyond your own contribution. It's really what Dr. Covey described as the private victory, having a secure sense of yourself and being so secure in that you can focus intentionally, abundantly, generously on lifting others around you. It requires a different level of maturity that a lot of leaders
It does. It requires
lack.
Awareness, it requires confidence and maturity. We find that a lot of diminishing, some of diminishing in its most tyrannical narcissistic form, of course, doesn't come from overconfidence. It comes from insecurity and underconfidence. But people have to be also comfortable in their own talents. Like, I'll tell you the person I want to work for. I want to work for the person who's an absolute genius and knows it. Like, I don't want to work for the person who's unsure of themselves, who comes into work every day trying to prove that they deserve to be there or that they're the smartest one in the room. I want to work for the person who's like, you know what, I'm brilliant, I'm a genius, and I'm over it. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, I get it. I get what I bring. I'm confident in that, but I am now past that. And I'm going to spend my time not trying to prove that I deserve to be here, but seeing what's going on around me. So it's a confidence. It's an eyes up, aware of people around you. And, you know, to be an intentional leader, you have to look at how your best intentions, the things that you do that you think are amazing and enabling and inspiring, how those are the very things that can suffocate the people around you. You have to ask, like, I wonder if people experience me different than I experience me. You know, because it's human nature that we judge ourselves based on our intentions, because we see they're visible to us, and we tend to judge other people based on their actions. And so it's learning to say, I wonder how my intentions could be received differently. Liz,
I want to save some time to talk about the accidental diminishers, because I think that's kind of where people can move into being a multiplier. Let's talk first about multipliers. So are there a couple of tangible multiplying moments, or for our guests that are watching to say, I really want to be a multiplier, how do I move into that? Are there any immediate ideas or triggers or watch outs you can tell people when you're finding yourself doing this, here's how you move into a multiplier moment?
Okay, great. So the things that multipliers do, they utilize people's genius, their native genius, the thing they do easily, freely. A very specific thing you can do there is look for people's native genius. What is it that they do better than anything else they do? What are they brilliant at? What are they head and shoulders better at? What are they going to do whether or not you want them to do? Now, you and I have both been doing this for long enough to have learned this. I've learned this the hard way, is that it's a lot easier to get people to do things that they're already good at than to try to get people to be good at things that they're not.
It's called
and
alignment.
Don't want to.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I probably learned this mostly in my own home. And so, as a leader, what you can do is, instead of trying to get people to sort of stay in the swim lanes of their job, what's their native genius? What are they brilliant at? What do they do at work, at home? Like, they can't help but do it, and then find a way to put it to use in their job or...
Well, in essence, that's a high-performance culture, right? If you can tap, as Stephen Covey would have said, the passion and genius of people and get it as closely aligned with the company needs, it's an unbeatable formula.
Oh, people will work for free. And I don't mean that we should exploit people for their native genius, but like, here's my dirty little secret, is if you ask me to do something within my native genius, oh, I'm going to do it. I'll put it to the top of my list. I'll do it for free. Like, I love to do, and most people are this way. We just go above and beyond. So it's not like you get 100% of people's capability. You get more because we grow. So that's one very specific thing. Look for people's native genius. You know you're good at this when you sit in meetings, and instead of hearing what people are saying, you're just like, wow, what is that person brilliant at? And my sort of my rule of thumb on this is, if you have figured out someone's native genius, you've kind of earned the right to put them to work, and they want you to put them to work. They don't need to report to you for you to do that. That's one. Another thing that multiplier leaders do is they don't tell people what to do. They ask, they invite, they define possibilities, and they invite people's very best thinking. And probably the most powerful shift I think any leader can make, but I consider this the ibuprofen of leadership development. Like, it cures a lot of problems, is to lead by asking, to ask the questions. And my very favorite challenge to give someone is what I call the extreme question challenge, is to go into one of those meetings, maybe you hit replay back to yesterday, and say, what if I went into this meeting and all I had in my toolkit as a leader was the question. No statement, no contribution, and to take the extreme question challenge is to go into a meeting, maybe it's a one-on-one, a management review, operations review, et cetera, and to say, I'm only going to ask questions. And you let your team do the thinking, and you frame the issues. You set the priorities by the questions that you ask. It's a really hard challenge, and if you're going to take this challenge, you go all the way with it. Like, absolutely nothing but questions, which I don't recommend you operate permanently forever in that space, because you will creep people out if you do this. But to take the challenge once or twice, because it really, I think it rewires how we think of our role.
Well, it also requires a long-term view. Because as I think about yesterday's meeting, while I'm dictating out these 14 sentences for some ad copy for a partner of ours, I'm thinking, so what's my purpose right now? Am I trying to make this partnership immediately more profitable, or am I trying to build capacity where these three people can take the marketing division to new heights beyond me? And I was clearly not doing the second. I was trying to maximize the relevancy of this project at hand, but I wasn't really inspiring. I wasn't multiplying. I was absolutely diminishing, and I was not doing my number one job, which is to build the marketing division beyond my contribution when I'm out of it.
Right, and
someday.
you could take a long view in a really altruistic way, which is I'm going to grow the people around me, and I want to be that kind of a leader. But if you take a little bit of a selfish view on the long term, it works just as well, in fact, in some ways a little bit better, which is, do I want to be doing this forever myself?
Right. I was thinking the same thing. What am I doing?
I'll never get to grow if nobody around me gets to step up,
right.
if no one gets to ever be as good as I am at this, how do I ever get a new challenge? And so you can take a little bit of a selfish point of view, a little bit of the lazy man's point of view, and it works equally well. When I started teaching this, I was really thinking about how do we help leaders become liberators to the people around them, become these multipliers that give people space and allow them to step up and take ownership and contribute and go big, and what an incredible liberating force that will be for their team. But what I underestimated is how liberating it is for the leader. Mm-hmm. And so I was working with a man named Dave Havlick, who was head of investor relations for Salesforce. And he came to one of our multipliers workshop, and he decided he was going to take a multipliers challenge, one of these specific things. And he decided that at his first opportunity, he was going to sort of hand it back to his team and ask questions and give ownership back to his team. That night, an email comes in that's like, Dave, hey, we've been waiting on you for this staffing plan. They had a big set of deliverables coming up, and he was supposed to put a staffing plan together for his team. And we're kind of waiting on you, boss. How often have you gotten these emails? Every manager has gotten dozens and dozens of these. We're waiting on you. We need this from you. And he decides he's going to, instead of staying up till 2 a.m, and getting it done, he's turns back to his team. He's like, okay, you know what? Can you guys put together a plan that's going to allow us to get through this 6-month hump of activities? And his team's like, yeah, we got this. And so I write this up, this impact it had on his team. I write it up for an article for HBR. I asked Dave to review it, of course, before I send it off. And he goes, Liz, you kind of missed something. And as an author, I'm like, oh, what did I miss? And he goes, you described how liberating this was for my team to be able to step up and take ownership and get this done, and what a brilliant job they did. He said, but you missed its impact on me. He goes, this was hugely liberating for me. He goes, I used to work till 2 a.m. on a regular basis. I could never keep up. There was never enough of me to go around. He goes, I am a totally different leader and a person because of this. I'm not on the critical path for everything. Mm-hmm. When we liberate our teams, we also get liberated. We get this time rebate back, and we allow ourselves to grow into bigger roles as well. And who doesn't like that?
I don't want to overuse the word genius, but I think the genius that you brought from your 35, 40 years of experience, the research...
40 years of experience?
In life.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I've definitely got 40 years of experience.
The research you bring to the book is, like my good friend Seth Godin, you have similar insights and talents with Seth, which is a compliment to both of you. Seth does something you do extremely well, and that is you name things that people like me were drowning in that couldn't identify in order to conquer, or at least identify in order to self-identify and move out of it. Does that make sense? You did this idea of being an accidental diminisher. You've named 5 or 6 or 7 of them, and I can identify a little bit. I'm a hypochondriac now when it comes to leadership. I'm some of this, I'm some of that. Oh, but you know what? Sometimes I have some multiplier moments. I think one of the part of the power of your book is you help me identify by naming things that before that I didn't have context for.
Well, I do spend a lot of time thinking about that. I can't claim to be a great writer. I do my own writing, but what I spend a lot of time thinking about are names. How do you describe this phenomenon in a way that people can access it and think about it and understand it? And part of that naming is so we can see it ourselves, oh, that's what I'm doing. Oh, I'm diminishing, or I'm accidental diminishing, which is even more subtle and in some ways more dangerous. But also when we give things names that we all experience, when we now have a name for it, we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. And that's how you not just change individuals, it's how you change cultures. We can't talk about it until we have names. It's one of one of the favorite comments I've got from, I was getting ready to go speak at a company. It was a large company in the Midwest, and the head of HR said, "We are so excited for you to come out." I'm like, "Oh, great." And she said, "Here's why. Because when you come out, it's going to allow us to have a conversation that we've needed to have for years with the CEO." She says it's a conversation that we just haven't been able to talk with him about this, because you're going to come and give us a language and a framework. And I hear that people say, "Wow, we're still talking about this years later because they have a language."
This idea of gifting a language to an organization sounds ethereal, but nothing is more practical or applicable, actionable.
Well, and it has to be a language that we can work with. And I had a coaching client who said, "Liz," we were talking about his genius, and he's kind of like, "I'm going to put it back on you." And he's like, "I'll tell you what your genius is." He's like, you're a truth teller. You tell people the truth, but you do it in a way that people can hear it. And I actually think it's a really important skill for all leaders.
I think it's right on.
To have is like, how do you talk about something in a way that we can hear it? Because if you come and tell me I'm a bad leader and that I'm not doing all of these things that I'm supposed to, or that I'm a diminisher, like, I naturally shut down. But when we talk to each other about the ways that we accidentally diminish, it opens up a conversation. Similar to the way we talk about, now we're spending a lot of time thinking about our unconscious biases. Like, no one wants to be biased. But when we talk about how sometimes with the best of intentions we can end up doing something we don't want to, it's a way people can hear it. And so it's the conversation I want people to be having across our companies. And here's something that I've noticed. It's kind of crazy. I've now been at this for about 8 years. And the companies that really go the distance with the ideas, who have real impact with these ideas that build a culture of high contribution and multiplying, are not the ones that talk all about multiplying. They're not the ones that would like take the book and put it on the wall and put posters and run training programs. Like, those things are helpful, but they're the companies that talk about diminishing, where the conversation about like your accidental diminisher tendencies and my accidental diminisher tendencies, like, I'm an idea guy, I'm an optimist, like every now and then I get into rapid responder mode. Like, when that is not like my hidden secret, like everyone on my team knows it. Right. They laugh about it, and it's in the air. So like everyone can know and sort of laugh about the CEO's diminishing tendencies. When those conversations are legitimized, it actually allows multiplier behavior to get more normalized.
Speaking of CEOs, you and I've talked. We've been friends for a while, and we've talked about the impact your book had on our CEO, Bob Whitman, who I think, for being an expert in our industry, right? And you'd think that the CEO of FranklinCovey would have some expertise, and he certainly does. And I've talked to you about how fond I am of him personally and professionally. I think beyond the 7 habits, multipliers, from my experience with Bob Whitman for 22 years now, I think your book has had the largest noticeable influence on Bob's behavior and his mentality, because like all of us, he can accidentally fall into these diminishing capabilities or capacities. And your book gives permission to recognize where you are accidentally diminishing and kind of always be pointing towards becoming a multiplier.
Oh, of course it makes me so happy. And, honestly, when I was writing this book, I did not have the Bob Whitmans in mind. I'm thinking about like the tyrannical, narcissistic bullies when I'm first writing this book, and I'm thinking about, some like the Silicon Valley leaders I had worked with. I wasn't thinking about its impact that would have with leaders who were already amazing leaders at fine-tuning. But so it thrills me, and I really do see this message not being, and I've come to see the utility of the book not being for like, how do we help the really terrible leaders become decent leaders?
Well, you identified most of us kind of in that middle zone. It's sort of like Stephen M.R. Covey, who wrote The Speed of Trust.
Yes.
Part of the magic of his book is he has these 13 behaviors of high trust leaders.
Yeah.
And he talks about, here's what the trust behavior is, tell the truth, and here's the opposite, lie.
Right.
But in the middle is the counterfeit, which is sort of, to spin and technically tell the truth, but leave the wrong impression. For you, by identifying accidental diminishers, it's not I'm a total, you know what, or I'm the perfect leader. It's a lot of us find ourselves well-intended in that middle zone of diminishing by accident, and we don't want to do that. We want to be a multiplier.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Stephen M. R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, because it was funny. I was in a conversation, like a family event, and I overhear my mom talking, and my mom was my first round editor for the book. Like, I would write stuff. It was like back to high school. Like, I'm writing, Mom, could you read my essay before I turn it in? Because it didn't occur to me that I could turn in a manuscript to HarperCollins that still needed copy editing. The copy editors at HarperCollins were like woefully underutilized.
You, right?
Yeah, they said, we've actually never seen a manuscript like that. And I'm like, that's just flattery. Then a couple years later, they're like, no, we actually have never seen a manuscript this clean. Because I gave it to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, like, fix my typos, fix everything up. And so my mom had read this through several times, and I hear her at this.
For grammar and punctuation, more so than content.
Well, and content as well. So I'm now on a sidebar to answer this question, but my mom and I actually wrote a book together called The Multiplier Effect, which was written for educational leaders. My mom is a former principal, so she knows the content really well. We're at this family gathering. I overhear her. I hear Elizabeth and multipliers, and she says, if I could sum up Elizabeth's book, she calls me Elizabeth, like she wouldn't know who Liz is, but she said, if I could sum up Elizabeth's book in one word, it would be trust. Isn't that interesting? And I was kind of like, wow, how come you didn't mention that? Like when you were like editing all those things, you kept that observation to yourself. But I really do. I think it hinges on this idea of trust. And, you asked, like, what are the things people can do to be multipliers? Name the genius in others, ask the questions, create space for people to make mistakes, give ownership to others, give someone 50% of the vote. After you help, remember to hand back things. These are all things we can do, but they're based on a fundamental assumption. And the best I could capture the assumptions of the diminisher and the multiplier is the diminisher assumes that nobody's going to figure it out without
me.
Without me in the middle, or me out in the lead. Whereas the multiplier assumes that people are smart and are going to figure it out. It's really no more complicated than that. And it's actually kind of an offshoot of Carol Dweck's growth mindset. It's Carol's work has been about what is the assumption we have about ourselves? And does it allow us to learn and grow and take on new challenges and adapt? But in some ways, multipliers is saying, what's the assumption we have about the other people? And when you assume that other people are fundamentally like smart, intelligent creatures, well, what do? You're trusting their work, and it's about extending responsible levels of trust.
You realize the team I lead is now all unionizing up in corporate marketing. When I walk back up there, they're going to call me out.
They're going to be, Scott, trust us.
Let's talk about accidental diminishers.
Yes.
Because I think that's the best way to get on the path to multipliers. You name 7 or 8 of them. And the first one I read, of course, is Idea Guy or Idea Gal. You have
Guilty.
Always On, Rescuer.
You know what? That's first on the list.
Why?
Oh, that's like me confessing. They're not alphabetical. They're not in order of prevalence. That's my coming out of the gate with, I'm a massive idea guy. I constantly have to keep this under control.
I have to tell you, when the book was first given to me a year ago,
Was it turned to that page?
It was not, because here's what happened. It was given to me to use on someone else. To say, look, so-and-so needs to read this. And like any human, I could jump on that bandwagon.
Right.
That's why it was given to me. Kind of, form a coalition to say, so-and-so needs this book. I read the book, and the thought never crossed my mind to think about the other person, because the way you wrote it, it spoke to me. And I immediately went introspective on, I don't care about the person that this person is talking about. I resonated with, oh my gosh, I am the idea guy. I am the guy that's valued.
It makes me so happy that you said that, because it was one of my worries, is that people would read this book and be just pointing fingers.
Right.
So I think I really doubled down
Mission
on this.
Accomplished. It had the opposite impact for me. Right. I mean, because you can see people want to point the finger and blame other leaders. Even mature leaders want to hold their boss accountable. As soon as I opened it up, and I thought, oh my gosh, I am the classic case of the idea guy. I'm known as being fairly creative and an idea a minute, and the spaghetti wall, throw it up, see what sticks. Most of it will.
Okay,
Which one do we pick?
So let's work with this, because let's kind of look at the anatomy of an accidental diminisher tendency. It's about your best intention. So what is it that you, like, what's the goodness that you think is going to come out of it? Because the intention is so noble here.
Rescue is that my ideas will be so profound and innovative and new that I can help to solve a problem. And our EVP of HR tells me I play the role of rescuer by being the idea guy.
Which is another accidental. You're conflating too. We're going to have to separate.
But I have multiple characteristics here.
But yeah, the idea guy, like, we want to get the party started. We're like, you know what? We think our ideas are good, but we don't think they're the only ideas. I'm going to toss out some ideas to get things germinating and going, and we toss them out thinking other people are going to then take them and use them as springboards and maybe get to somewhere else. But now let's look at how this impacts other people. So what's it like? Have you ever worked for an idea guy, like someone who, like, sort of trumps your level of idea guy?
Not necessarily. I worked for some of these other ones, but...
Yeah, well, this is what it's like to work for an idea guy. Has your team explained this, like what it's like to be around
they do every day.
The fountain of ideas?
They do every day.
What's the experience for them?
I can't say it. Keep going.
Okay.
Fatiguing.
Yeah, it's fatiguing because...
It's constantly chasing the next project simultaneously. Which one do I work on? Because you've got 10 things I'm working on.
Here's this crazy thing about management is that most of us think that managers are like egotistical, power-hungry kinds of folks. I found in my coaching and teaching work that actually most managers underestimate their power. You're probably underestimating your power. When you're tossing out ideas, you forget that you're the boss, and that when you toss out, hey, well, why don't we think about this? Why don't we try that? You know what people do? They take you seriously.
It is so true. I think that, in fact, the CEO would say, he wouldn't because he's gracious, Scott Miller is one of the most powerful people at FranklinCovey, because he can get anyone to do anything, and half the time it might be right, and half the time it might be wrong.
Yeah, and it's one of these ones where just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And like with power comes all this responsibility of restraint. And
well, now you tell me, 20 years.
and we forget that people take us seriously, and we think we're just like tossing out ideas, like, you know, just
processing outwardly, and
yeah, you know what, I'm thinking aloud, I'm tossing out ideas, I'm getting things going, but people are taking you seriously,
right,
and they're running with it, and you're exhausting your team, and they're soon making a millimeter of progress in millions of different directions, and it's exhausting, and people end up just going, you know what, I'm actually just gonna stop chasing rabbits and stay right where I am.
You've exactly described my world. How common is that when you consult to companies around the world? Is it unique to FranklinCovey or my division?
No, it's in certain industries, the idea guy is even more prevalent. It's not one of the top three. I'll tell you what the top three are, but the thing with the idea guy you have to remember is, because we're not done with you just yet. See, I know this because I really struggle with this one, is that people tend to get idea lazy around people who are idea rich. Like, okay, is it easier if I actually have to come up with an idea, do I sit in my office and think, or do I just walk down to Scott Miller's office? Because he's a fountain of ideas, and that fountain goes off like every hour, or
Versailles,
or every half hour. You know, like there's an idea, you know, flow there, and so I'll just take his ideas, and so suddenly you become.
I've created a dependent culture.
You've created a dependent
culture
and a hero culture.
Independent people.
And it doesn't take much to spawn rescuing. Rescuing
Did you call it a hero culture?
Yeah, a hero culture. So the three accidental diminisher tendencies that we see most often. Rescuer. Rescuer is in the top three. And of course, the rescuer is, this is the big-hearted leader. The intention is, of course, I want to help and save. Like I want, and these are really good people and noble intentions. I want the people around me to be successful. Like nobody fails on my watch. But the rescuer often steps in too early or too often, and people do become dependent. Like one of the things that we have to develop as a leader is the ability to stand back and watch people fail.
Which is intuitively obvious and culturally challenging, especially in a for-profit company when you don't have a lot of elasticity. Right? I mean, you're either running by quarters, you have goals to meet, and you don't have a lot of bandwidth, or rather,
You can't afford the failure.
You can't afford the failure.
Right.
Too big.
Which is one of the things that you have to do as a multiplier leader is identify where people can take risks. One of the things I love to do is work with a leadership team and look at all parts of their business. Where is it okay to fail? And where is it not okay to fail? And we get a really clear water line. Jim Collin calls this like the water line where you can shoot cannons and where you can't. And you get really clear on where's the space where we can't fail. Like, great, know it, tell your people, you know what, no failure here. I will rescue you here. Like, I will throw myself over that to save the day, because that's below the water line. That will take us down. But see this place up here where it is okay to fail? Go big, take risks, and I'm not going to rescue you in that space.
Liz, our time's closing in on us. You mentioned 3 prominent diminishers. What's the third?
Pacesetter.
I love that one. Love it because I can identify with it.
Lots of us love it, and it's leading by example.
Describe the Pacesetter.
The best intention here is I am going to model the way. I'm going to set the pace for quality or for customer service.
Productivity.
For productivity, I'm going to model the behavior, leading by example, how we've been told to do this. I'm going to model the way. I will be the role model for the team. Other people will notice and they will do likewise. They'll follow. But what we find is when the leader gets out ahead of her team, people don't tend to speed to catch up. They watch. In some ways, they stargaze. It's like people are like watching you do your thing. You know you're in this mode when people tell you, oh, like, you're amazing. You know, if I ever get that sense of someone says, oh, you're amazing, I'm like, oh, that's Pacesetter.
That's great advice.
Territory. You know, people are like, hey, let me know if you need help next time you let me. You know, when we lead by setting the pace, we more often create spectators than followers. People aren't with us, they're watching us. It's a very, very different dynamic. Creates a huge gap. The third is the rapid responder. Like, on it, you know,
every email's responded to.
Every email's responded to, clearing out your inbox, text messages, you know, your fingers are kind of attached to a keyboard, you're like, smell a problem.
I need a hat.
Solve a problem. And our technology is enabling us to do this. This is one where we almost have to collectively disarm from some of this rapid responder. But we think we're keeping our organization moving really fast, but what we actually do is create lethargy around us, and people wait. Like, if they know you're a rapid responder, let's say it's sent to, like, a request is sent to me. It's my area of responsibility. I'm on your team. It's clear. Everyone knows it's my area of responsibility, but they also know you're copied on that email. We all know Scott's going to get to this first. So what do? Because I don't want to get out of sync with my boss. Right. Nobody likes to have said yes when the boss said no. Right. So we hold back and we're like, Scott's on it. I'll let him do it. He seems to like this. And then suddenly you can't figure out, well, no one on your team is stepping up and taking ownership because you're moving too fast. I'll tell you maybe a quick workaround for that one and maybe the others. If you're a rapid responder, wait 24 hours. Like, if something is sent to you, you're made aware of something, wait 24 hours for somebody else to jump on it. My rule of thumb is, if I've waited 24 hours and no one's jumped on it and they should have, then I'm all over it. You know, if you are...
But that's one way to be genius makers, is letting other people bring their genius to it and solve it versus you having to solve it for everybody else.
Yeah, and that's why I need these little workarounds, because these accidental diminisher tendencies in and of themselves are not bad. They're all virtues. But if they're left unguarded, if we're unaware of them and we don't have a little workaround, you know, like, I'm an optimist. No one on my team really wants me to be an awful pessimist, but I have to have a workaround. My workaround to my optimism is I learn to signal the struggle.
Share your concept about, you talked, I think, in a podcast about, as being an optimist, you talked about recognizing hard work and that things are hard.
Yeah, I learned to signal the struggle. So I am, the optimist is like a positive, can-do kind of leader. Like, we see possibilities. For me, I think it comes from my early days at Oracle, where I was just thrown into big jobs. You're like, hey, this can't be that hard. And we tell ourselves, we're smart, we're capable. Like, these are leaders who probably wear these like wristbands that say we can do hard things. No one wants me to be a downer, but what the people around you want to hear is, hey guys, what we're doing is hard. It's hard. We're going to struggle with this. We're probably going to make some mistakes. And I know this is anathema to certain people to even hear this, is you have to be able to say, like, we might fail at this. And it's so interesting that once the leader signals the struggle, Like, I get it that it's hard. It actually allows the team to move beyond it. Because if the leader only sees the upside, what is the rest of the team relegated to do? Obsess about the downside. So when the leader acknowledges the downside, what does it do? It like allows the team to say, okay, we get it. Now let's go make this work. Let's go get the win on this. I've had to do this because I'm like, optimism is deep in my bones.
This may sound corny, but in many ways, multipliers is your gift to making geniuses genius makers. Because when I read this, I'm not a genius in any stretch, but it's really inspired me to be more thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about being the hero, about being the genius, saving the day, rapid responder, pace setter, rescuer, always on, idea guy. I mean, I can identify with all of those, and your big point is that you're well-intended, but unless you have a sort of a raised consciousness about those, you can become
a genius with no friends, a genius who wonders like why no one else on the team can do what you do. It's about getting everyone leveling up.
In our final minute, share your thoughts around how you resist being a diminisher. I read and I heard a podcast where you mentioned you'll come into a meeting and you'll think you have the solution and you'll take a little bit of restraint. You even write things down versus say them. Talk about that.
I'll tell you like my personal strategies that I have to use a lot. I love think on my feet kinds of sessions. I realize not everyone does. So one of the things I do to help everyone be able to contribute in the moment is I've learned to send agendas out in advance. And instead of saying, hey, here's our agenda and the topics, I send out questions. Like, here are the questions. Come in ready to weigh in on these questions. I'm constantly having to play fewer chips. I try to go into extreme question mode. Usually when I go into extreme question mode, it's when something has gone very, very wrong. We have a crisis. Or when something's gone really right. Because it's really easy when someone brings you a success and they've just had something amazing happen. Like when your daughter wins the math contest at school. Like, this is where I first learned this. I'm like, oh, that's amazing, blah, 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 blah. And like suddenly it's about me. And I've learned when someone brings you a brilliant success, like just ask them, so what happened? What did you do? How do you feel about that? And it becomes their success and you get to sort of revel in it with
versus
them.
Versus co-opting it.
Yeah, no, it's very easy to co-opt it, just like it's easy to co-opt a problem and take on ownership. So those are a couple things that I try hard to do, and I have tried really hard to see the native genius in people around me, and particularly with my children. And I think, it's funny, I wrote this book based on research, I wrote it for the business community, but for me, like the gift it's given back to me.
Oh, I can see, yeah.
Is I feel like I have been a very different kind of parent because of this. And I don't know if I've used what I've learned about leadership to be a good parent, or if what I've learned about being a parent, because you just get punched in the face all the time. Like when you do it wrong at work, nobody tells you, they talk about it behind your back, but when you do it wrong in your home, they punch you in the face with it. They're like, Mom, stop it, these aren't your friends, these are my friends, Mom. And I feel like I have really come to see the native genius of each one of my children, and like my job is to not turn them into something they're not. My job is to see who they are and help them figure out what to do with that. Yeah. That's been my gift.
Liz, your company's name is called the Wiseman Group. You spend most of your time writing and speaking. I think you're probably one of the most prolific speakers on the circuit around the world right now. I see you at the World Business Forum and speaking most of the conferences. If someone wants to adopt the Multipliers content, what's the best way to kind of get their feet wet?
Well, there's the website for the book, multipliersbooks.com.
Multiplier books.
Multipliers.
Multipliers.
Books.com. So it's plural on both. We actually have this book, which is oriented sort of to business and lots of different environments, and then we have the multiplier effect for school leaders.
Right.
And or the wisemangroup.com. I'm at Liz Wiseman on Twitter. We're not very creative.
You're keynoting mainly in organizations, associations. If someone wants to bring you in to keynote a conference or a company, you're doing that quite frequently. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and sometimes it's with a company, sometimes it's with a conference, and a lot of times it's at universities. I love universities. I love being on university campuses, and
anybody can see, if you go into the YouTube and see some of the videos of you, I think you should be a great keynote at our conference as well too, because our company, although everybody is well intended here in living our content, I think multipliers could have a great benefit at FranklinCovey, which is why the CEO is so interested in your content. I'm honored. What a great time I've had listening and being thoughtful about how I can move more towards the multiplier side and unload some of my diminishing baggage on my team.
Well, it's so fun for me, and because you have just modeled exactly what we want every reader and what I want myself to keep doing, is just asking the questions, what might I be doing that's diminishing?
Text my wife that I'm modeling. It might be helpful.
Model student, Scott
awesome.
Miller.
Liz, thank you very much. Hope to have you back someday.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. Hope today was valuable and inspired you. I used myself as a business example so that you might feel a little less burdened, and we're all on the path to becoming multipliers more intentionally. Thanks so much for your time, and we will see you back here next week with our next guest. Thank you so much. Thank you, Liz.